Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
Back, and I'm no longer the GraphQL Foundation. Hooray!
I was wondering who tried to sign in as GraphQL Foundation and then backed off. But
Yeah, that's like Matt can be host. I'll come back in a minute. It's because I signed in to get your AI summary of your notes from the composite schemas working
it's
group,
it's
and
really surprisingly good. We'll check it
I'm
in
really
as
happy to hear that.
yeah. We do a pull because what is brilliant is really that it tracked all the action items essentially.
Oh, that's really cool.
I mean, you saw like there was like Michael has to ask Benji to get the AI notes.
Yeah, I now start just telling the AI that it should note down action items for Michael, you know. By the way, Benji, I joined the club.
Yes, I was just admiring that. I wasn't going to comment.
I gave up. I gave up.
It's the GraphQL look, I think.
So, Michael's brother also has a bald head, and now Chili Cream, we will make a podcast, the three eggheads.
Nice.
That's amazing.
Uh,
All right, so we'll see folks trickling in. So we'll get started in a minute or so. You've got a lot of stuff on our agenda today.
Also, lots of folks in this meeting.
Yep.
I hope we don't scare them away.
All right. Our participation is almost lining up with the attendees listed in the agenda. So we'll get started because we have a lot of things to cover today. I'm looking at our agenda file. I was scrolling through it earlier this morning and I was like, there are 20 agenda items. And we'll make it through as many of them as we are able to. Okay, so to kick things off, hello everybody and welcome to the April 2025 edition of the GraphQL Working Group. Of course, by all joining, we agree to the membership agreement, participation and contribution guidelines and code of conduct. Links, of course, are always in the agenda. And then also that reminder that these meetings get recorded. They get published to YouTube, and we also will, run summarization tooling over them in order to help us with note taking. So if anybody ever has any concern with that, please let me or Benji know. And as we always do, we are going to do a quick round the room of names to faces, so that everybody makes sure we know everybody else here. And we will go in the order that is listed in the agenda doc. which has me at the top. So hello, everybody. My name is Lee.
Hey everyone, I'm Benji.
And I'm Martin. Hello, everyone.
I'm Alex coming from DoorDash.
Hey, Rob from First Dibs.
Hey, Benoit from Apollo.
Pascal from Chili Cream.
I'm Matt.
I don't think Kue is here yet. I'm Jordan from Meta. I work on Relay.
And I'm Michael from Chili Cream.
Did we miss anybody? I think we got everyone. All right, welcome everybody. Okay, we're gonna jump straight into things because reviewing our agenda, again, there's 20 things in here. So we're just gonna jump straight into it. I sure hope that everything that everybody wants on the agenda is on it for this month. I have a feeling that we might need to do some ad hoc overflows if we don't get through everything today. But Benji, you've got the first one on the list, so I'll hand it to you.
Hey folks, I don't want to spend long talking about this. Please send your feedback through the issue that is linked in the agenda. But I propose that we do a spec cut, and I propose that we set a deadline for this of the 1st of July. So that gives us 3 working groups, including this one today, to get any changes that we want to get changed in, and then a couple of weeks after that last one before the July spec cut. At that time, we will then have to go through the review process where the TSC approve things. We have to go through some legal work in the foundation itself. But hopefully that means we should maybe be able to get one out by September. That would be my aim or my hope for that. So if you have any reason to not do this, please contribute to that issue. If you support it, give it a thumbs up. That's it for me on this one. Thanks.
I'll just say that not only are we going to do this, we're going to aim to do it even slightly faster than that schedule. Ideally, we have a new spec cut out at or before the GraphQL conf in the fall. And in order to make that happen, what we will likely do is do a sort of release candidate preemptive cut in early June. The purposes of which is mostly for this group and other groups who need to do review to get started on that review process early. The lion's share of the changes that we'll need to be reviewing are things that have already landed, and so it'll be worthwhile to make sure that we're all reviewing those ahead of time. That way we can kind of, scan through any remaining changes that come in the final month, but hopefully most of those are small and editorial. And hopefully that allows us to kind of parallelize a lot of the review processes with the actual finalized spec cut. That should hopefully increase the odds that a July 1st spec cut is in fact the one that makes the final cut and not just a deadline. So we'll see how that works out.
Out of curiosity, did it happen a lot that there were some changes needed after the draft is cut? Like, I was under the impression that once it lands in the draft, like almost all the work is done, but looks like there's an additional step after that.
So there's 2 kind of things that happen in parallel, one of which kind of lines up with what you said, which is sort of the legal review. And they just kind of scan through and make sure that we haven't missed anything important. That has very little to do with the actual technical work and more to do with the structure itself. So we're going to start moving that along in parallel. I don't anticipate any bumps in the road there. That just takes a little bit of working. It is usually the case that as we gear up for a spec release, we get a significantly more editorial changes. The volume of editorial changes goes up because everyone is now looking at it with more scrutiny. And the good news is that we've been going through a lot of those editorial changes over the last couple of months. So I don't anticipate too many things, but I'm sure as soon as we actually pull something out, do a diff view, see everything that's changed, people will start to scan through that with a more critical eye and provide feedback. Some of that feedback we want to pull in before the spec cut. Others we might deem not spec cut blocking and just have that as follow-ons. But nonetheless, I anticipate some of that.
I'd also add to that since our last spec release, the TSC have been exercising more autonomy. Whereas previously, pretty much everything would be signed off by lead before it went into the draft. So there wasn't much of a need for final review.
Yeah, and it's been a while, so there'll be some. Okay, I'm excited about that. All right, Pascal, next is yours.
I try to keep it in these 2 minutes. I've posted the discussion around or the shout out to people which are interested in the open telemetry specification as a discussion on the GraphQL workgroup repository. And there's quite a bunch of people which are interested. Now, I've synced with Benji quickly about this, and we think it probably makes sense if we do a quick, short-lived subcommittee for this, hopefully. And then we could probably do a few meetings there and then knock out like a good specification. Now, what we actually, Jen said that we should just bring it to the work groups. So to like check if everybody agrees with this, and then we can set up the template for the subcommittee. So anyone against doing this? Great.
I think it
Great.
gets the rubber stamp.
Yeah, that's perfect. I mean, the specification has to be done at GraphConf because there may or may not be a talk about it. So that's an additional motivation around it. So yeah, we should get started with that. Cool. That's it.
Nice. All right, let's see what's next on our list. Benji, it is back to you for extensions.
Hey, so I've raised this a few times already, I think. We've honed it. It's ready to be merged as far as I'm concerned. Essentially what this does is it adds an extensions property to the request. Implementations don't need to do anything with it. The point is to give them somewhere to put stuff if they want to be able to do things. And it's mostly because this is a useful shared location. We considered just putting this in the GraphQL over HTTP spec, but we also have GraphQL over WebSockets, GraphQL over server-sent events, and probably more things in future as well. So it made sense to centralize this as part of the description of a GraphQL request and as a reserved namespace for implementers to use. So that's all this is. A paragraph explaining why and the 2 lines saying what it is.
Cool. I know this one's been kind of floating for a while in feedback phase as it's advanced through the stages. It is small, but most of it has been kind of surfing through, you know, what tooling will be compatible with this along the way. Seems like all that's been smooth. Yeah?
Yep.
Sweet. Approved.
Hooray. Next.
Next is really similar actually because it's about explicitly forbidding implementation to choke on unknown fields, like extensions for an example, but also on error or stuff like this, which we are going to talk about later. So it's a small paragraph that makes it really explicit that new fields may be added to the request and that implementation must ignore them actually.
I've just added the editorial label to this because this is already the case. But yeah, it does make sense to call it out, I think.
Yeah, I don't know any implementation that handles it otherwise, but just feels safer. We probably needed that like 5 years ago, but I guess now is better than tomorrow.
But isn't that more relevant on the HTTP spec? Like
well, we are
the
looking.
outer spec maybe gets a JSON, but you basically don't map it to the GraphQL request. Doesn't matter then.
Yeah, we have this in the HTTP spec already, but I think it does also make sense for GraphQL implementations. If you're calling in, passing an object that describes it, it's got schema in it, it's got the operation, it's got variables. If someone sends an additional property, which is, for example, what should I do when an error happens? Should I just abort the whole request? Should I bubble it like I've always done? Or should I not bubble it, which we'll get to? Then a schema that doesn't understand that should just carry on and execute normally. Like every change, we are basically promising that every change we do here will be additive.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I think this is broadly right. I might come through the wording slightly, but this is a good clarification.
Did we put a name for this one, RFC2 or something like this?
I think it's just editorial because this is
Oh,
not
all right.
changing behavior in any way.
Sounds good.
So I think it's just I'm gonna drop a little comment in here.
Should we hand on to Rob?
Yes, Rob, it's all you.
Yeah, so I have 2 editorial changes. This is the first one that it was actually approved already this morning. It was pretty minor, so I'll just briefly just say in this algorithm, we were calling like the result of execute selection set a result map, and there was just some places it was response map, some places result map. So just standardizing on result map. Response is already overloaded quite a bit, so just clarifying that. Then last month we were talking about the definition of response, and we had said that we wanted response to mean the thing that a GraphQL request returns, and that is one of either the object that has data extensions, errors, etc., or the what you get from subscriptions, which is called a response stream already. So this, I changed the definition to call it response payload, naming the object that has data, errors, etc., to response payload. I also explored response map as an option because that was used here too. But I do like payload. We are using payload to describe the stuff returned by a subscription already. And I think payload fits for the other stuff that I want to add for incremental delivery. So yeah, I would like to get thoughts on that. So this PR is almost entirely it's changing the title from here into response payload, making sure that's clear, and then going through the other places that we use response and where it's referring to that object, calling it a response payload and defining the term.
I feel like this is the only time we use the word payload, which
So we already use it. Well, use it twice in the spec, and they both are to do with subscriptions. And when we use it in subscriptions, we use it to describe a data errors object. But yes, there's only 2 instances.
and even that one is kind of weird. Because I feel like payload is like a serialization and transport level kind of concern and not like a data structure kind of concern. So even the streamy one is kind of strange that it's called that, in my opinion. Anyway, this is just a terminology nitpick, but the structure of this change I think is good.
Yeah, I'm open to other terms. If we go with this, then for incremental delivery, I would be adding incremental stream, which has an initial response payload and a subsequent response payload. And then response would be one of the three different types.
Just trying to think of other uses of payload, and it's very, very commonly used as the return type of mutations. They often return a payload type, which describes all of the things on it. So I'm not sure that I agree. I don't think I agree that payload is specifically to do with the final what gets sent over the wire. I think it is more often to do with the data structure.
Yeah, at least in messaging, you often talk about payloads, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's the reason why it's used in streams.
Yeah.
Like in this stream, because you have a very close analogy to messaging. But for response, it looks weird.
Cool. Okay, well, let me dig through it a little bit more deeply and see if I can't come up with an alternative wording scheme. I think at some point we had tossed around the idea of a response map instead of a response.
Yeah, I did actually have that map. I have that proposal too. But open to any other terms besides these two. I like payload because I felt like with the incremental stuff, it sounded better than initial response map, subsequent response map.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And Rob, just so maybe I didn't read through this, we do have a definition for the initial response payload and subsequent response payload somewhere else, right?
Yeah, that will be depending on it's going to be in the incremental delivery spec draft. But and it'll eventually be in that response section. Depending on which direction we go here, I haven't updated it yet.
Just as a very small aside, I was discussing earlier that it might be worthwhile us having some kind of small language that we represent these things with, like TypeScript in the spec, because it makes figuring out what these various things are a lot easier when you can see that response payload equals an object with these properties as like not prose, but as a simplistic representation. I think me and Rob found it quite enlightening when we were doing that to actually help us figure out what these words should be. Anyway, I don't want to talk too much about that now. I just want to put it on people's radars.
Quick question. Would it be an option, like, would it be another option to use both? Because response map makes a lot of sense for a response, but for the incremental delivery, like this was motivated from the incremental delivery spec where you said that the initial payload and the subsequent response payloads actually make more sense language-wise, right? So could it be that it's just payloads when we talk about the incremental stream, but it's a response map when we just talk about the response? Or is this more confusing than it helps?
I think even today it applies with the response being either the thing you get back from a GraphQL query or a subscription, you're getting a stream of the response payloads.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, we don't have to decide right now. Let me know any thoughts and we can move on.
Cool. Yeah, let's take the rest of the review offline for this one since we got a lot of agenda items and we'll keep trucking. But the structure of this looks great. Thanks for cleaning this up. Cool. Benji, you're up next.
All right, I have a number of editorial pull requests, so let's go over them in order. We'll start with consistently use response name over response key. We use both terms, response name and response key, in the specification. We should pick one and stick to it. We use it to refer to the same concept, and the word that I went with response key to start with. That's what I felt was right. Then I looked in GraphQL.js and it turns out it uses response name primarily. So I've changed it to response name. I don't care which one we pick, just want us to pick one. But GraphQL.js uses response name broadly, not so much for the new incremental stuff, I think. So I think we should just go with response name and standardize it.
I'm also in favor of that, given we're reducing the reference to map based on Rob's like earlier, right? So there is a like maybe a little dependency there.
And broadly, this is motivated by the fact I want to define a response name so that we can refer to it in future pull requests.
Yeah, I mean, this is almost certainly just like a very, very long-standing artifact of the fact that Dan and I were both like writing aspects of this simultaneously in the early days.
Yeah, and it hasn't really mattered until now.
Yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, I think response name is the right. Did you just like how frequently did we refer to each? Do we consistently refer to name everywhere except like the handful of places you caught it, or is it kind of relatively balanced?
I don't recall. I remember in GraphQL.js, response name was by far the dominant one, certainly in the historical stuff. But in the spec itself, I don't recall.
Okay.
But actually, yeah, it looks like response name is, I mean, it's fully covered in the diff. So you can see where the keys have changed to name. Yeah, it looks fairly balanced, 50-50. I think probably the spec lent towards key maybe slightly, but
Yeah, I think we were probably doing that to make it clear in what you would expect from the resulting data structure, since the result of executing a field selection is a map. And so it is then natural to talk about key value pairs in that map. But you define that. So I think it's fine to say that there's a field name and a response name, and one of those two becomes the key in the map. So this looks good to me. I like it.
cool. Next one. Renaming field error to execution error. This one has bothered me for years, especially when implementing my own GraphQL engine. We lie. They're not field errors. I mean, they are. They come from fields, but they don't always come from the field itself. They can come from inside of the field. And that's really the main issue. One particular thing in the spec is we have words like, if all the fields from the root of a request to the source of a field error return non-null types, then the data entry in the response should be null. But that's not true. If every field in the chain returns a non-null type, but inside of that non-null type is a list, which then has a nullable type inside of it, then the error will stop there. It won't go all the way to the root. So it's inaccurate. And I think the main reason that it's inaccurate is because we use the word field error and we confuse it with field, but what we actually mean is like a position in the GraphQL response. So I have gone about defining that, I think. Sometimes I wish I wrote less stuff. Where's my definition? I can't find it. Oh, there we go. A response position. It's right near the end. So we now define a response position. I don't know that this is necessarily the correct term. And in fact, I'm kind of uncomfortable with it anyway, but it does match up with a lot of what we say already. So a response position is either like a field or it's a position in a list within that field. So essentially, it's something that can be indexed by the path that you would have on an error. Now, one reason I don't...
Yeah, it's part of the part of the result, not part of, because a field is part of the data, part of the schema and part of your query.
Yeah.
But as you like loop through arrays and things, the actual error is located within the result.
Except it isn't, because of error propagation. So it doesn't always come out of the result. Like it's the potential result that sometimes then gets destroyed, right? So it's more of an execution position is what I effectively landed on. And then I was like, nah, we'll just go with response position because it makes sense. And it ties in with the rest of what the spec talks about. Definitely open to changing that. But one of the key things here is this is a really important definition, the response position, because it's used quite heavily by incremental delivery. And it will be useful for also the error propagation stuff that we're doing. So basically, it's a definition that we need. And field is not the right one. So we defined that. And then what I've done is I've renamed a field error throughout the spec to be an execution error. The idea is it's an error that happens during execution. Always that will be within a field. Like it will be typically either from the result of calling resolver, or it will be from the result of coercion, or it might be from the result of coercing the argument values before we do the resolver call, but it's going to be from a field, but it could actually be from inside of the list. Another thing that this allows is the kind of spec definition of allowing an error to be returned inside of a list directly. This is something that I don't think the spec really hearkened to before, but the GraphQL JS implementation does literally allow you to have an error instance in a list, and that will then be surfaced as an error, even if there was no descendant selection set that blew up to generate that. So it also allows for that. Basically, it massively crisps up what we're saying about errors and tries to be a lot more precise.
Awesome. I agree with this. We've all talked many times about how the way that we describe errors is not exactly what we want. Oh, I see. It looks like okay. I'm gonna give this like a careful review. It looks like you've put a lot of detail into this, so I'm sure you've probably nailed all the pieces, but I will carefully read through this afterwards. But broadly, this gets a big thumbs up for me. I think this is the right thing to do.
Perfect. It doesn't look like there's any other feedback, so we'll move on to the next one. This next one is one that we've brought up a few times. It is renaming execute selection set to execute grouped fields. It's not just renaming, it's actually restructuring the algorithms, it's refactoring. We essentially introduce an execute root selection set, and that's the only execute selection set we have. And then we have execute grouped field set from there onwards. And it rewrites how we manage that stuff. We don't kind of pretend to create a new in-memory selection set that didn't really exist. We just deal with the grouped field set. This is what GraphQL JS has done basically forever, I think. I'm not sure when it was first introduced. It's what GraphArts does. I would assume it's what other GraphQL implementations do. So it better matches the execution model of GraphQL. Also, it's needed to make things like incremental delivery easier. It's needed to make various other things easier. And it really simplifies quite a bit of where the algorithms work and removes a lot of the repetition that happen in things like execute query versus execute mutation. Because they can simplify down and share that root level stuff. So yeah, it's just refactoring. And also I've had the GraphQL JS folks have signed off on it saying that it matches what GraphQL JS does. So no changes needed. It's just editorial.
This is a big editorial change since it's an algorithm refactor, so I will definitely carefully read this. But any change which gets GraphQL JS and spec closer in alignment is definitionally good, because the whole original point was to have those two mirror each other. So this feels long overdue. Thank you for building this.
Cool.
All right,
Next one. Apparently I raised this one on my birthday. Oh, whoops, shouldn't say that publicly. An input value is defined as being either a variable, if not a constant, or a literal. And one of our validation rules, the values of correct type, doesn't note that. And I think it has the assumption that we're dealing with a literal, because we don't know what the variable is yet. And we don't need to coerce, we don't need to check that the variable makes sense there, because that's handled by a different validation rule. So what I've essentially done is just clarified that by just putting the word literal in there. I have also added some of the assumptions that we have in there. We do assume that if there is a variable nested within, for example, if you've got an input literal object and you have a variable as a property of that, we assume that the runtime value of that will be able to go in that position. We have another rule that checks that the variable is only used where it's allowed to be used. Or yeah, I won't try and name it. And we also have a validate variables, sorry, coerce variables that we do at the beginning of execution, and coerce arguments as well. So basically all this stuff is covered elsewhere, but I'm being much more explicit about this. Primarily, A, that we only care about literal values in this, and B, that when you meet a variable, when you're validating that literal, you just assume it's valid. You don't worry about it. That's a problem for later.
that sounds right to me. I think this is a good clarification. Very nice.
It's needed for one of. So that's the motivation for it.
Because wait, how is this related to one of?
It's to do with like validation of one of. Let's not get into that because I don't remember.
All right, cool. Benji, thank you. This is a huge amount of editorial stuff to dig through. Thank you for showing them all up. I've popped them all open to give them careful reads through after the meeting. And all of them look in very good place. We will continue. Before execution begins, Benji and Martinez, this is both yours.
Yes. Okay. So this is actually kind of a joint effort. In 2021, I raised this issue saying that we have the phrase before execution begins in the spec, and yet we don't actually mean before execute request begins, which is what you might expect. In fact, we have a chapter that's called execution or something like that. And you might think, oh, it's before that chapter begins, but it isn't. That's not what we mean at all. And effectively, through a process of elimination and implementing your own GraphQL engine, I figured out that execution begins when we execute that first selection set. So if you're doing a subscription, for example, execution doesn't begin when you form that response stream. Execution because if you fail to form that response stream, that will be a request error. So execution begins when we start to execute the first selection set, or the root selection set if we merge that previous pull request that we just talked about. So I've written a definition for execution, which I think may be controversial, but it is a word that we use throughout the spec, and we do use it generally, where I've italicized it, consistently to mean this same thing, the execution of the selection sets. There are other things that we talk about in the spec, such as request execution, which I think is okay because it clarifies as part of the word. We also have a mention of GraphQL execution, which I haven't qualified at all, haven't attempted to change. But when we just use the word execution as a bare word, almost exclusively, this is what we're referring to. So I've defined it, and then I've gone back through and I've italicized it in all of the places, not all of the places, in most of the places that I think it is relevant. Originally, my plan was to actually define the phrase before execution begins, because that we use quite a lot. But it turns out there's a few other things that relate to this as well. For example, we say that if something goes wrong, then the request must fail without execution. For example, if the variables can't be validated. But that happens during execute requests. So again, that refers to this concept of don't start executing selection sets if your variables ain't right. And so on and so forth. See the bullets in the description.
I wonder if we want to. I'm not opposed to strong defining the word execution, but it is certainly a bit concerning that we are not clear with the rest of our terminology. Like it's not. It feels like this gets us almost all the way, but we're not quite internally consistent. And it seems like the root issue is that the execute request algorithm sounds a lot like execution, but isn't. It is like it includes execution plus other things.
Yeah, I've described it as including the preamble to execution and the execution itself. Martin, handing over to you.
Thank you, Benji. No, just so I share the same concern about terminology, and so I opened a follow-up pull request to rename execute request to process request, which at least makes it really explicit that it's different from execution. It's not a silver bullet because we still have the execution what is the chapter in the specification, so we still have that, which is 90% executing selection set, but it's a little bit of more of that. But at least if we have separate terminology for execute processing request, it will make it a bit clearer. So that's the intent of this second pull request, which I think I based on your pull request, Benji, or if I didn't, I should have.
Yes, I think you have. So the idea is if mine gets merged, yours can be merged afterwards, or they can be merged together either way.
That's the plan.
Okay, I'm gonna look at this one more carefully. I think ideally we don't need like a big structural rename, which both of these are aiming to be like a needle thread between, just renaming just enough things to make it more clear, but still kind of leaving things in a internally inconsistent state, which doesn't seem ideal. And I don't have a great proposal yet for how to get out of it. I kind of like the idea of framing this as like pre-execution, but it is clear that there's a case of like there are a sequence of steps where the last step is the execution, and we need a clear name for that sequence. And we almost have that because we have validation, which happens before execution. And I'm wondering if there's like a different thing we can try out here.
I mean, it's a little bit more subtle than that, right?
Yeah.
Because you've got query and mutation, which are broadly similar, and then you've got subscription, which works in like quite a different way. So subscription performs execution multiple times, whereas query and mutation only perform execution once. So I'm not sure that it is so much as two different like phases. It is like a preamble to execution, and then the execution. It's the setting up of execution, and then the performance of that execution in whatever the algorithm demands. If we didn't have subscriptions, it would be very straightforward. That said, I think we'll have the same issue with incremental delivery, specifically stream. We will then perform execution again on each item in the stream, but it will be a different, not the root selection set.
Yeah, I don't love how these concepts have become intertwined. There's the concept of, okay, I won't use the word execution because we're starting to overload it. But there's the concept of sort of forming the request in a sort of asynchronousy way, right? Like many things will occur over a window of time, and then your request will complete. And I think it is reasonable to call that collection of thing an execution. Like I submitted a single document and I expect that document to be executed, which happens over a window of time. So we've been using it in that sense. And then we've also been using it in the sense of there is a specific operation that occurs kind of pseudo-synchronously, like fields have to resolve, but like, you know, it executes once given an event or like a phase of incremental or something like that. But there's like a singular process that runs and completes, which might happen multiple times. And I don't know how I feel about this. I kind of want to keep execution a top level concern and then have like I think we have the selection set, execute selection set as like the specific one that occurs once per event or once per phase.
Okay, so what do you think that we would change the before execution begins to be? Like before execution of the first selection set begins?
Okay, maybe we should back up for a second. Why is it that we can't call that part of execution?
So we
error source?
define the boundary between where a request error happens and where a field error or execution error, if we rename it, happens as the point at which execution begins. And the spec is actually really, really, really consistent on this. Like it always refers to that point as execution begins. It just doesn't actually define it, but it is the result. So what this pull request does really is it just takes that implicitness and makes it explicit.
I'm a fan of that. I like that change, but I guess the question is, you know, maybe we can use that as a tool to help us kind of tease out that, like, does execution happen multiple times for subscription, or does like selection set execution happen multiple times for a subscription? Does each subscription event, like during a subscription, does it interleave execution phases where it could fail for an execution error with request phases where it could fail for a request error? My sense was that the answer to that would be no. Like as soon as you begin your subscription, all of the things which could create request errors complete, and then the subscription is live. And then at that point forward, the only ever error you could encounter is a execution error.
Yes, that's the conclusion I came to. It's also the definition.
Is it true? Because like, what if the stream fails?
Exactly.
Because you could be subscribed at this point and then network error, and you haven't even executed.
That's not a. When you say network error, do you mean on the schema side, like from its event source?
You are essentially, you have like your event stream. This event stream may be a message connection that you have, right? And this connection, you're subscribed and waiting for the first message that then triggers the first execution. So when now or in between two executions happens an error, that is a request error.
That is a termination of the event stream. It's not a request error currently.
Yeah, but how would you surface that?
We surface it by.
Not at all?
Go on, Lee.
I was gonna say that sounds like a transport error.
Yes.
Which is outside of the GraphQL domain.
but it's like the GraphQL subscribe is subscribed to it. So how do you surface it to the user?
You surface it to the user as a transport error.
Okay, as the
I think Michael
within
means the transport that we're talking about is between the schema and the underlying mongoose or whatever that is giving us our events.
Your middleware and your backend connection fails, and you need to transport that forward. That's a good question. How do we do that today? I feel like that should be, yeah, you're right. That is a case that is less clear as to whether we would call that an error during execution.
We do actually have a pull request open that it talks about doing this, but Lee, you did some spec work a little while ago that crisps up what the current status is, and I believe that the current status is essentially that the event stream terminates with an error. That is different from the concept of a request error. A request error is one that yields as the total answer for a request, or possibly as part of the stream in incremental delivery, an object with the errors key and no data key. That is what a request error is. At the moment, we don't do that for subscriptions. We actually have the event stream itself yield an error, which is different from yielding an object that has the errors entry within it. There is a proposal to have the event stream terminate with an errors payload. But if we was to do that, I don't think we would call that a request error either. We would call it something else, like a subscription termination error or an event stream error or something.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I feel like this one is has got some open questions still around. I think in particular there's for subscriptions and for incremental delivery, it makes me uneasy if we're talking about this as interleaving execution with non-execution. But it is clear that we need to define clearly the distinction between these various phases and what can occur during the phases. Which seems like directionally aligned to the changes that have been made so far to distinguish pre-execution things. But it feels like the changes that we have now are not quite inclusive of that kind of problem domain.
Okay, I would say that it's still better than the state that we have, which leaves this very ambiguous to someone who wants to implement GraphQL. So
that's fair. So okay, maybe the right next move here is as a follow-up, we'll kind of first we should make sure that we have one proposal for the editorial change since these two overlap. And then we will kind of narrow through how do we want to make sure that we've moved closer to the thing that we want so we can merge an editorial change and maybe we have just some like inclusion of a non-normative note that describes the fact that there's like subscriptions at least are weird. And then that's something that we can come back to in the future.
Rather than overlapping, they are stacked, just to be clear. So there's no conflict between them. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Maybe. Oh, I see. I misinterpreted them as editing similar things. Yep. Do you want to do you and Martine kind of dig through Martine's change and then merge them together into yours? So we have one thing that we merged down into the main spec.
We could potentially do so. The main concern that I have with doing that is we're going to spend quite a bit of time discussing the terminology of what to rename those algorithms to. And I would like to have us be crisp on what execution, when execution begins according to all of the phrases in the spec. So I'd rather see them as complementary, like the refactoring comes later to tidy up. but we can.
No, that's a fair point. Okay, let's consider these as phases. We'll kind of review them together, and then we'll put them in phases.
Do you have a gut feel for what execute request should be renamed to?
Not really. We can kind of like noodle through various synonyms to see if we can't find one that kind of resonates most strongly. I think process is probably fine. We essentially just need a word that means a roughly similar thing that's just different from the word execute. So I think we've got it there.
I was leaning towards perform query, perform mutation.
I like that too. I like that maybe better than process. And the other thing I was thinking is just elide the word. Like we don't need a word. We can just we can use the
Just
a
call it
word like
request.
process or perform at the top level, but like the algorithms could just be query, mutation, subscription. The subscription one is literally just called subscribe right now. We don't do anything other than that. And
I
so
like that.
we could have a top level thing called mutate or top level thing
And
called
yeah.
query.
Yeah, but
I
that
don't know that I would
makes
necessarily want
sense.
to propose that, but it might be a reasonable thing to consider.
I mean, as verbs, they make sense.
Yeah. And it does imply that we did in fact think about this when we got to subscription, because note that we did not follow the pattern and call it execute subscription. We called it subscribe, appreciating the fact that execution was an odd concept with subscriptions. So, and now what we're pointing out is that it is subtly similarly weird with all the other ones too, and we should fix them all.
So sorry, just to conclude on that first pull request of the two, are you suggesting that we come up with a different name than execution to refer to in all of these places throughout the spec? Like maybe a two-word phrase that implies.
Yeah. To basically thumbs up in support of your broader clarification that execute is something that is very specific. We refer to it everywhere else in a very specific way, especially as we start renaming the errors as execution errors. We should be very, very clear about what it means to be in the execution phase of an overall of something. And so right now, the overall something is the request, and the request has phases where you do query validation, variable coercion. We sort of like work through these phases, and the execution is the last phase of the request. And so part of what I'm feeling uneasy about is now we're talking about like a subset of that overall request set of phases that's in this like other thing. And that's part of what feels slightly strange. And I'm wondering if we need it, we need it. We have to pick a word. I think perform is a pretty good word. And I'm curious if we can noodle around with the text such that we can avoid having to add an additional concept there.
Okay, so I think with the refactoring that we proposed previously in I don't know 4 pull requests ago, the execute grouped field set, we can actually just say that execution is when you are doing execute root selection set, which is its own algorithm, and that would align with all of the implementations then. So maybe if we accept that one, get it merged, and then rebase this on that, and then maybe move the definition to there, whilst also, as you say, eliding the words from the algorithms, that combination of solutions that are interdependent may get us closer. Okay, great. I think I know what needs doing there.
Cool.
Thanks.
All right.
Alex. Hello. Martin has graciously agreed to move his agenda item after number 14, so I'm going to do mine back to back. 2 things to burn through today. I'm going to get through the first one pretty quick. The nullability working group has reached a consensus on disabling null propagation. We have coalesced around Benji's request parameter solution. The previous solution used a query directive. We felt that this one was a little cleaner and it didn't require altering outgoing user queries. Is that about the summary of it, Benji?
Yes, one extra thing that you've missed out as a benefit of it is that it allows us to default the option to true in a future version of the schema if we want to. So it means that you can just automatically opt clients in by it being a request parameter. Otherwise, you would need to edit the document to add the directive.
Yep. We think this is for people that don't have too much context. We want this for any number of reasons. People generally don't like null propagation, but it's also disabling it is also useful for clients like Relay, which have normalized caches so that they can trust the data that they receive back. This is the proposal that we're pushing. I encourage people to go and look at the two pull requests that Benji has there, leave comments on them. If there aren't major issues with it, if there isn't a lot of pushback, we're going to be trying to seek either stage 2 or stage 3 at the next working group meeting for that. But we think that it's generally people generally approve of it. Any short comments before I move on to the next thing?
I look forward to reading it in more depth.
Fair enough. Cool. Then I
Should
will.
we make it at least RFC 1 today? Feels like it's almost RFC 2.
Yeah, good call. I think yes, let's do RFC 1 because that implies at a minimum that we all agree that this is the problem that we're trying to solve, which certainly seems agreeable. And this feels like a very solid proposal. And then we'll work towards RFC 2.
And the main bit of feedback is if people come up with better naming for it, I'd love to know a better name for on error, propagate, no propagate, and abort. Though to be honest, I think they're reasonably good as they are. But you know, group thought. Back to you, Alex.
Cool. Burning right along. Originally, that earlier proposal was part of this proposal, but it's been broken out. These two proposals are useful on their own, but better together. You're gonna see some more of that. Lee, just to give you a heads up, I'm gonna throw to you when we reach your solution. So just so you're not surprised. Cool. So for the past so many years, the Nullability Working Group has been working on finding a solution to this nullability problem of null propagation and more accurately describing the nullability of schema fields. It's gone through a bunch of iterations, but I'll go through what we're on right now. It's a quick reminder. There are a few reasons a schema author might make a field nullable. They might do it because it actually is nullable. A user might not have a dog's name field populated if they don't have a dog. But in status quo, they might also make a field nullable to avoid the destructiveness of null propagation. In fact, that's what we suggest that people do. Is make fields nullable unless they are okay with their fields being blown up. Because if a field is marked non-nullable and it returns null, it propagates that null to its parent field, and it continues to do that recursively until it either finds a non-null field or it reaches the data field, and everything is blown up. A lot of problems with this. People don't like it. It restricts people's ability to use partial results. It also restricts, like I said, normalized caches from being able to trust their data. And then because people are marking everything nullable, then they need to unwrap fields and null check fields in circumstances where they wouldn't normally have to. This also conflates fields that can error, which is all of them, with fields that are nullable. And that's not good for expressivity. This is the schema that we're going to be looking at today for all of our, the nullability group has come up with a bunch of solutions. We've rejected a bunch of them, so I'm going to go over the rejected ones first and why they've been rejected. But this is going to be the schema that we're using for all of these. In this case, age and posts are fake nullable. Under normal circumstances, we don't expect them to be null, but they've been marked non-nullable to so that we can get partial results. And then dog's name is real nullable. A user might not have a dog, in which case dog's name could be null. Solution 4 was the one that the nullability group voted to pursue back in October. After pursuing it, we've sort of the issues with it have sort of accumulated, and the voting has flipped to a different solution, which I'll get to later. But this would have introduced a few new pieces of syntax, a document level directive, which you can see there, that establishes this document as being in a new dialect of GraphQL. In that dialect, question marks represent nullable fields, and unadorned types represent semantically non-null fields. These are both breaking changes, which necessitated sort of this dialect. Semantically non-null types means that null can occur in that position unless there's also an error in that position. Null cannot occur in that position unless there is also an error in that position. And if there is null without an error, that itself also creates an error. There are a few issues that came up with this. It creates a new dialect of GraphQL, and GraphQL snippets are no longer locally legible, meaning you can't look at a smaller portion of GraphQL and understand what it means without broader context around it, without knowing what dialect we're working with. So yeah, you can't look at a field definition alone and be sure what it means. This also breaks existing educational materials. And then document directives are a new concept which would need to be proposed separately before we could progress. And it's also unclear what syntax input types ought to use. There's a lot of sort of back and forth, a lot of disagreement on this, and that sort of indicated to us that maybe there was a problem here. Solution 3 is nearly identical to solution 4, except it uses double bangs for non-null fields and single bangs for semantically non-null fields. It has all of the same problems as solution 4. Solution 5, I'm going to throw to Martin for why we're rejecting solution 5.
I guess it's mostly backward compatibility or maybe more evolution for very large organization. Solution 5 is basically just use the bangs that we have right now. Like we don't need new types. We just use bang for non-null and no bang for nullable. And we encourage everyone to add bangs everywhere, which is technically a breaking change, like changing a field from nullable to non-null. It's technically covariant, but it changes the error boundary. So if you have an app that relies on partial data, and you have a large app with lots of native apps that you need to support for years, you need a solution, and this is why we didn't go with solution 5. But we have other solutions. So I give you the mic back, Alex.
Thank you. So those have all been rejected. We can talk more about them later, but basically their original champions have they don't have faith in the proposal anymore. So they've all moved to other stuff. So on to stuff that's on the table. Solution 1, transition to a brighter future. So there are 3 solutions that are left on the table. This is the solution that the nullability working group currently backs by a majority vote, although it's not unanimous. This is a solution I personally back. I highly recommend reading Benji's blog post about it to get more depth, but I want to go over what we're thinking about this now. Benji, do you want to link that in the chat for me? So this has some obvious pros. Sorry. So this has some obvious pros in comparison to previous solutions. This is what we're looking at up here. It maintains local legibility. The current meanings of all current fields are maintained, and we can tell what they mean. There's no dialects. In this one, we're introducing asterisks as a piece of syntax that represents semantic nullability. And this has value on its own, but we think something spectacular happens when it's combined with our other proposal to disable null propagation. When error propagation is disabled, strict non-null fields and semantically non-null fields are functionally equivalent. They both can be null, but only in the case when there's also an error to go along with it. Functionally equivalent. This means that if a schema author is creating a new service and expects their clients to disable null propagation, they don't have any actual need for semantically non-null fields. They can stick to the two traditional types of nullability. So who is semantic nullability for then? It's for schema authors that want to transition existing nullable fields that should have been non-null the whole time but weren't due to error propagation, to being non-null. Because of that, under these two proposals, we view semantic nullability as a transitional type rather than something core to GraphQL in the long term. And this is something that the three proposals left on the table have in common. Semantic nullability is no longer something that we see GraphQL using in the long term. It's now something to get existing services towards the more correct nullability. Because it's transitional, this proposal has a transitional state and a projected end state, which you can see here. So in this case, we start out by moving the nullable fields that were semantically nullable. We treat them as semantically nullable, and then down the line, once all of our clients are disabling null propagation, then we can safely switch to strict non-null because it will no longer propagate. Solution 6 is mostly the same as solution 1, but it offers some verbosity in the form of a directive rather than syntax. This also preserves option value since no new syntax needs to be introduced. We can use asterisk for something else in the future if we want to. Martin, do you want to talk a little bit more about why you favor this solution?
Yeah, no, to be honest, so I kind of like the transitional type. I think this was the breakthrough. And I feel like with bang and no bang, we have something that is acceptable. Like I love the initial idea of doing like Swift and Kotlin. This is the dream goal. But after spending years on that, I made peace with it and acknowledge that if we wanted to a practical solution, like just the bang is good enough. It doesn't change anything. And then we would have a transitional type. So then the question becomes, which transitional type do we want? Do we want asterisk or semantic non-null? And I like them both, to be honest. I have a slight preference at the moment for semantic non-null because it doesn't introduce new syntax. I also like that it's a bit convoluted because it makes it really, really clear that it's not there to stay. It's transitional only. Because it's a directive, we can restrict it to output types, which we cannot with types. So it has a couple of nice properties, but I was discussing it with Benji earlier, and the implementation might be a bit awkward or hacky in GraphQL.js because it means we are basically encoding a new type as a field metadata. So I also understand that. So yeah, stuff that I really need to dive into more, but now, all things being equal, I think I prefer solution 6.
I'd also like to surface that I would be very happy to see solution 6 as well. I think solution 1 is better than solution 6 only because it's easier. Well, two reasons. One, it's easier to adopt because you just add asterisk rather than adding a big long directive. And two, because I think the implementation in both the spec and GraphQL.js is easier because it just operates on types and you just say, is it non-null or is it semantic non-null in all the places that you just currently say, is it non-null? And it's basically the same almost everywhere except for in the error handling. Whereas the directive is a little bit more complex, but they broadly achieve the same goal in the same way. So I'm happy with both. Just wanted to surface that.
And 6 has also one more advantage. Relay, for instance, implements it already today. We implement that already today. Gratz. There are a couple of open source libraries in the GraphQL space that already implement solution 6.
Yeah, they're not mutually exclusive. You can convert one to the other very, trivially.
Yeah, I'm just saying this would already be implemented by things, so that's a plus point.
But I mean, the impact on the ecosystem is lower with the directive.
I'm gonna keep going. We're gonna have some discussion later, but I got a little low on time here. Moving on to solution 7, this is Lee's proposal. It removes null propagation entirely and offers a refactoring script which adds propagate error directive to all currently non-null fields. The propagate error directive can then be removed piecemeal. I'm gonna throw to Lee now. I think I have that right. Let me know.
That's probably right. I think, Martin, you pointed out that solution 7 here and solution 6 are almost exactly the same thing. It is just what are you doing during this transitional phase? So the main reason why I'm skeptical of solution 1 and would strongly prefer either 6 or 7 over it is if we are going to introduce this as a transitional phase, then I definitely don't want to add new syntax that's in GraphQL forever, because eventually you exit that transitional phase and then all of a sudden you have this like asterisk that's in the grammar forever forward. And if the hope is that the vast majority of organizations will go through this transition phase quickly, and a very small number of organizations, I'm sorry, meta folks, that basically just means you, will like very painfully work through this migration, you kind of don't want to have like lingering artifacts afterwards. But while you're in this transition, and I'm definitely thinking about meta in this case, is what do you want your schema authors to do while you are in the transition phase? And my concern with solution 6 is while you're in transition, it is a breaking change to be adding new bangs to things, which could cause fields to throw. And what you actually want people to do is add the new thing. You don't want them to add old, error propagating non-nulls. You want them to add new semantic non-nulls. However, the old way to do it is the easy way that people will remember, and the new way to do it requires a directive and like education, and as a result, you'll be kind of constantly chasing down pull requests that accidentally broke shit because they added the old way to do it. So that's basically the lens through which I'm looking at this alternate proposal, which is once you have sort of done this first, someone on an infra team, code mods everything, and they get it into this initial state. From then on forward, an unadorned exclamation point just means a nullable type, which doesn't propagate errors, which is what you want. And all of the ones that came before that, when someone lands their big diff that migrates their GraphQL service to use this new thing, is all the ones that do propagate errors have been tagged with @propagate_error. The other thing that I realized is I would love to make this it's not about nullability anymore. Like even with solutions 1 and 6, the type system itself doesn't change. We're not changing the type system, we're changing error management behavior. And part of what I'm trying to do with solution 7 here is make it really clear that actually nothing has changed about the type system at all. What this directive is describing is how error management will occur should an error, should a response error occur while executing this particular field.
Matt, can I circle back around to you during the discussion? Is that cool?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, cool. Great. One thing you might have noticed is that the end state for all of these is literally exactly the same. We're all trying to get to the same place. It's the transition. It's how we get there. I think there's not a ton of daylight between these, and this is the most confident I've been since I started this project. I would personally be satisfied with any one of the solutions on the table. But one more thing, we have solution X, which is we could do nothing. Status quo is a choice, and it's a choice we've made for 5 years that I've been working on this project. And during discussions in this vote, I'd like us to think about that. Choosing to do none of the options on the table is a choice to leave GraphQL in its current state. It's not free. It's a choice to continue to be a thorn in the side of our users. So we're talking, don't just ask yourself, am I happy with this solution? But am I more happy with this solution than the status quo? Cool. Discussion. Matt.
Yeah, so Lee, you bring up a good point about like very large organizations. Luckily for Meta, 6 or 6+7 are essentially the same because we're not schema first, we're code first, which basically, so long as we still have the directive, we're in an okay state. But if you were schema first, I actually think you need both 6 and 7 because you need to be in this transitionary state. You need to first allow people to adopt semantic non-null. Then you need to enforce that that you're always null. And so that's the like error propagation that you slowly remove. And then you like add the bangs, like when you have that on everything, you add the bangs on everything. And now there's all treated the same, and then you remove them, and then you're done.
I kind of like that. Anything that gives like a schema maintainer more control over the process is going to be good. And having like once we realize that 6 and 7 are kind of duals, then you're right. Like these just basically describe different points along the continuum of managing this transition. At which point then it's just like a naming question of how do we get these into a naming convention that aligns. Because my only real main bone to pick with 6, or why I propose 7 as an alternative, or I guess there's 2. One is the thing that I said of like I want the easy thing, the like not think too hard thing to be the right thing, and I would be concerned that like adding a directive was not that. But the other is the semantic non-null, and you can blame me for coming up with that term in the first place long ago, is I think at this point not exactly what we want to describe here. What we actually wanted to describe is doesn't doesn't throw error. Like what you actually want to be able to do instead of just saying like this is an int, which by the way is not marked in the type system as being non-null, however does have a directive on it. Like right now this feels like in a little bit of an intermediate state where the type is telling me one thing and the directive is telling me something other. And I feel like what I would actually want then, Matt, in the world where we have both, is to be able to say age is int bang at no air bubbling or no air propagation.
Exactly. That's in fact, once everything with either directive has a bang, then you ought to be able to start removing the require null bubbling or require propagation, and things should not break. And then you can remove the semantic non-null because now behavior is identical.
Which I like because then the type system is just the type system. And if you just look at purely the type and you're generating types from the type system, you will always get the right thing. And then the directive is there to describe error propagation behavior. And
Benji?
Yeah. I think there is basically 2 ways of looking at this. One is it's either a type or it's a field annotation, and they each have their own advantages. You're right. If you do it as a field annotation, then you can either add the bang or not. And if you do it as a type, then it meshes much nicer with, for example, putting it through the parser or the printer. It just sort of naturally meshes in that way. Now, one of the important things that I think people should consider is the begin state is that we only have unadorned and bang and no directives, no extra symbols. And the end state is we only have unadorned and bang and no directives and no symbols. And my proposal is that essentially the transition state is we have none of that either. for the vast majority of users. So what I propose is basically, if you are using an error handling client, then you take whatever the schema gives you and you turn it back into that old syntax, but you have bangs in more places. If you're using a traditional client, you take what the schema gives you and you turn it back into the old syntax, but all of those bangs or asterisks or directives or whatever have gone. So most users, anyone who's writing an app, would only be dealing with this simple form of the schema. And this is very much just transitional. And the only people who should have to think about it are the schema authors who want to say, actually, this field is non-nullable, but it might error. So I want to add a special thing to it to say it's null only on error, which is what the original proposal for semantic non-null was. Jordan.
Yeah, just like one thing that I would love to see more of is like all of this is like predicated on clients being able to do more of their own error handling, either via, client-side null bubbling, in order to retain existing semantics, or other sophisticated types of error handling, or just discarding all responses with errors. And I just haven't seen a ton of that like in the ecosystem. I know we have like examples of it working with like, libraries, but I haven't seen it like, in like used anywhere. Obviously we're doing some things in Relay, but I haven't seen that much elsewhere. So I wonder, if we feel like that's a concern, that like if that doesn't actually pan out as well as we imagine it panning out, that all of this is a bit like predicated on that.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. It's one of the reasons that I'm still a big fan of solution one, because essentially, even if that does turn out to be the end state, we're not forcing this new world order on people. We're giving them the tools that they need to deal with it. And I think it still boils down to either you're an error handling client or you're not an error handling client. And for each of them, you have nullable or non-nullable, but what that means to you may differ. And also, I've just shared in the chat, you can, like in JavaScript, you can make any GraphQL client except Relay, an error handling client with 512 bytes of JavaScript, and Relay does it for you anyway with built-in directives. So like basically any JavaScript client can be this. I'm sure it's similar to do in other languages.
Okay.
To Jordan's question, aren't like all the users who discard the wall response whenever there is an error? Like these are examples of error handling clients. So
That's
there are
correct.
already a few in the wild.
Yeah,
Maybe
Jordan.
another thing to call out is that one of the challenges we've had with the directive-based approach is that it doesn't come through introspection. And that's been a blocker for a lot of people trying to adopt the existing user-aligned solution of semantic non-null. So maybe that pushes us back into that corner too.
But we have also for other directives in the type system things in the introspection, like is deprecated. We could introduce a field for a directive.
That's indeed what we would do and what has been proposed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that means getting this directive as part of the spec is beneficial, even just above having it in userland in the way that it already is supported. Makes sense.
It also means it's something that's going to live in the spec long term, just like the asterisk symbol would.
Yeah, I mean the biggest issue with the asterisk symbol is the impact that it has on the ecosystem. Like all existing tooling would essentially from one day to the other break. And I don't think that. So we're talking about transitional phases. We would be in a transitional phase of the ecosystem where there's tooling that supports the asterisks and tooling that doesn't support the asterisks.
Right. And if you do introspection, then you wouldn't see any of those asterisk types anyway. Like you only would see them if you opted into seeing them, which I think is an important case. This is also a case where solution 7, I think, falls down as well, because you would see the non-null bang, you would ignore maybe the directive, which you can pass, but you don't know what it means. But the meaning of what is actually under that bang is different. It actually can be null if there's an error there, which, as you say, would break the existing tooling.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is more about operating on schema files, not going through introspection, because what like as soon as you write tooling or look at the tooling landscape that we have, there's so many tools out there that need to parse a GraphQL schema. And if we introduce an asterisk, these tools would be broken. And I don't think that I much prefer either of the directive ones. Because there's also tools which still works, which are not maintained well and whatever, and they would just be gone. Like someone has to actually pick it up and change the parser to something that supports it.
If you're dealing with SDL in any of these solutions, we can convert that SDL to traditional SDL, the beginning state and the end state, in any of these three solutions that you can then use with your tooling. So any existing tooling can support the SDL by first piping it through a very simple conversion, which for asterisk is if you're using an existing client, you just remove all the asterisks. That's it. If you're using a error handling client, you just replace all of the asterisks with bangs, and that's it. Then all of your existing tooling continues to support the SDL by just having this simple transform. And that's true for the other ones as well.
We're running out of time a little bit. While Jordan's talking, can people put in the chat if there are any of the solutions on the table where they would take status quo over that solution? And then we're going to do another one with just ranking.
Yeah, I just want to,
You mean what we prefer, right?
Yep.
yeah, I just want to point out that in many cases, it's easy to wrap a tool in something like a transform like that. But I think there are other things like editor integrations and other things like that, syntax highlighting, other kinds of tools that are maybe not quite so straightforward. And then oftentimes you get bottlenecked. You can't make progress on anything unless all your tools are compatible. So like the stodgiest of your tools ends up being the bottleneck. Maybe a better way to say this, I suspect we will also end up with a directive approach either way for people who can't yet support the syntax version. And we already have one.
Interesting. Did everybody submit a ranking that they who wants to? Interesting. Okay.
I think
All right.
7 has a lead.
Yeah. Yeah, the directives are more popular than I would have thought. It's interesting. Cool. So here's what we can do. I was hoping to reach a consensus today, but I don't think it's gonna necessarily happen here and now. Okay.
We learned a lot of good stuff right here. We learned that broadly the room feels changing the syntax is a very high bar that this problem does not quite meet. At least based on what people are saying in the stack. And so that's something certainly that we could take away and discuss more is, you know, do we want to take that feedback, or how do we want to think about new changes to the language itself? You know, should we change the way that the syntax works? Or then for 6 and 7, or some combination of the two, to Matt's feedback, it seems like we're starting to narrow in on what will the problems look like as you migrate, and how can we make sure that we account for all of those, which a variant of 1 would need to do anyway. So that very much seems like the next problem to go tackle is thinking through all of the error management situation.
Got it. Cool. So I think it seems like the main issues here are figuring out how tooling is going to work with these. So if we can figure out a user story for the asterisks, then we'll come back with that, and then figuring out a user story for code first shops for these and what those look like. Okay. Cool. Well, thank you. This has been very helpful. I appreciate it.
Before we head off, I just want to try and surface a few more things. there is quite a lot of other pull requests that are currently active, many of which got punted from this meeting or punted to the end of the schedule. So many of them are RFC2 things that are already ready to go, basically, and just need a few more approvals, and then we can merge them and get them into this next spec cut. They are all linked in the agenda. Please do have a look through them. There is also Martin's include deprecated, which I think you want to advance to RC2. Martin, over to you.
Yes, are we doing that now, or like it was RFC1? It's about nullability. It's to make include deprecated non-nullable. I think there was an objection, a possible objection that some users may pass null, but no one really reached out in the last month. So it's been RFC1 for at least 1 month now. I suggest we move it to RFC2 and RFC3 next month if no one has any objection.
Kuwait, I know that Facebook often treat not present and null as the same, and Matt, since you're here as well, can you confirm whether this would cause issues? Not right now, but like, if you could look into it, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just bumped it to RFC2, and I think your plan is the right plan. Cool. Well, I've got some work for me through the rest of the week to review through all of the remaining ones here. I'll repeat Benji's ask for everybody to kind of scan through the agenda and dig through those PRs and read through them and give them good critique. And the goal will be to get as many of these merged as we can before our next month's meeting. That way we can then start focusing on the next spec cut. Thanks everybody, especially Alex, for leading a very productive discussion on moving nullability forward. See you all in the next one.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.